actually human services into the housing committee. So we also deal with homelessness and other social services as well, which means there is a lot on our plate, but these are issues that we're passionate about. I have an incredible team that is working on these issues with me. And what I'm trying to do is identify the urgent issues in housing and homelessness, fix the issues that we're seeing through conversations and being in communities, identify what the council and the housing committee is missing, use that information from the community to chart our priorities for the next 2 years, and to really take a hands-on approach to housing and help unstick a lot of issues that have been stuck for a long time. So let that be all I say as an introduction. And I'm happy and eager and excited to jump into some housing questions.
Yeah, so thanks for that bit of an introduction, council member. I know, kind of us on the planning, we have some questions that we're going to kind of start by diving into. But to, folks who are joining us, like, please, use the chat function, drop any questions that you have for the council member there. We have, folks between, the Young Dems of Ward 2 and the Young Dems of Ward 6 who are going to be monitoring the chat, and then we'll, go to that kind of at the end of this, kind of prepared question and answer period, and then, start tackling those questions. So kind of now that more announcements over, council member, you've talked about your role on the council, and kind of, talked about shaping those priorities. But as we're thinking about the issue of housing affordability in the district, what are some of those, early identified priorities that you've seen, you've heard about, and what are some of the, ideas or solutions that you and your team and the committee are beginning to kick around?
A great question. Coming into this role, I wanted to be careful. A lot of people have agendas and thoughts on housing that have existed for many years. I don't think the city needs me or anybody else to just adopt anyone's agenda. So listening is important. Average person does not come to council hearings or ANC meetings, as we know. So my goal is to take the housing committee into the community. We are spending a lot of time in public housing, in substandard rental housing, in homeless encampments, talking to people about the issues that they're seeing what they see, hearing from them, and really charting our long-term priorities that way. In the short term, coming into this role, there were a few emergencies happening that we had to jump on. One is the DC Housing Authority, which manages public housing. A lot of people read the audit or saw the articles late last year indicating that our housing authority is not in a good place. We have more public housing units that are uninhabitable than anywhere else in the country. We have an agency that is in crisis. We have an agency filled with people who frankly have lost trust. We have people relying on the agency who have lost trust. So getting housing units back online, putting transparency in DC Housing Authority, and really charting a new direction for that agency has been one priority. I'm excited about progress we've made already, including getting a board of experts that can challenge the executive director. For the first time ever, the committee and the board are receiving internal audits from the agency, things that are not flattering. So we have more insights than the council and public have ever had about what's happening in the agency. And we really have charted a course of transparency and reformation within that agency. As I came on board as chair, the city was also executing yet another clearing of a homeless encampment, which is frankly not a productive way to address encampments, either if you want to get rid of encampments or because you see the humanity of people living in the encampments. These clearings move us in the opposite direction. So I jumped in head first. I just started going to encampments, talking to people about their experiences, why they were there, not at our shelters, not in housing. And what I quickly found is that the majority of people in encampments, the vast majority, had been approved for housing vouchers years ago. So the issue is a backlog in getting people who have been approved for housing vouchers into housing. So I've jumped on that issue as a priority. I've asked the city administrator to give us an emergency plan to unclog this logjam so that we can get people into housing. The third immediate priority has to do with the Housing Production Trust Fund. This is a place where we put hundreds of millions of dollars, but any of you all sort of, renting or looking for housing in the city, you can tell that trying to find affordable housing is virtually impossible, despite how much money we spend on this program. So we have been diving deep into the Housing Production Trust Fund to start to understand why we're investing so much money, but we're not seeing the result of what seems like more affordable housing that everyday people can afford in our city. So those are the immediate priorities that we've been addressing in this first couple months, and some insight into how we are forging the agenda, the 2-year agenda for the committee.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. And I think too, knowing as, I think even us as, young Dems, in the district, like that's something that's very important to us, is being able to, find somewhere that's, in the place where we do want to live, even if we, came here for work, or, came here for a first job and have, decided to stay for further jobs, just like myself. And, I think, that's just a critical piece of, I think welcoming, new people into the district, but also, ensuring that folks who, grew up here, were raised here, have family here, are able to stay here. And I think, talking about just like the Housing Production Trust Fund, kind of jumps to a question that we had, just based on our last panel session that we had. We were joined by, 2 guests to, talk about just the issue of housing affordability. And, we talked a bit about inclusive development. And so this is still kind of a priorities related question. But what kind of priorities do, you as the chair, or, the full committee have for this year on development, and promoting equity, kind of in that process, and, ensuring if it's not ensuring, but I guess, if it's more improvements to living conditions, public housing, addressing displacement, gentrification concerns, there's zoning reform, there's a whole bunch of things that can fall under that. But, what are some of those things that you're, doing to, if it's promoting inclusive development or equity in this process?
Thanks for that question, and I appreciate the way you transition. There are a lot of native Washingtonians like myself who, frankly, should be able to stay here. This is home for people, and if you call a place home, you should be able to stay there. There also are a lot of people, particularly young people and young families, who have moved here or want to move here. And the last thing we want is to look up one day and say, hey, this is an entirely exclusive city. That's not what brought folks here. That's not what's going to keep folks here. Having a diverse and inclusive city that can grow without excluding people who have been here or excluding people who want to come here. That's the goal we have to strive for. To that end, to that goal, I've introduced a bill called the Common Ground Act. So this reforms how we redevelop public lands. Right now, if there is a dilapidated building, government-owned building, or an unused park space in someone's community, often, unfortunately, these DC government properties become a hotbed for nuisances. And what the government will do is hear from the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development. They'll hear from a developer who has a great idea about how to redevelop this space. And they'll go to the community and they'll say, hey, community, do you want this dilapidated building that's been sitting empty and attracting nuisances for decades? Or do you want this new plan that we have already cooked up? But we don't want to hear your voice in sort of what you want in your community. Well, the new use is always better if those are your only options. The way that I'm trying to reform how we redevelop public lands is putting communities in the driver's seat. So let the community determine the highest and best needs for that community, and let that be the driver of the development. And where we develop housing, the bill would require more affordable housing and more multi-bedroom housing, because another challenge we have is that when people have kids, or people who are here who have kids, you find it very difficult to find 2 and 3 bedroom housing. So that's called the Common Ground Act. That's one piece. The other piece, this has to do with displacement as well. If you live in public housing and you just can't take any more of the mold and mildew, or the rats, or the leaks, or the rudeness, and you have to leave, you often are displaced from the city. So I've asked the mayor to increase the amount that we fund toward housing, public housing repair and maintenance, to $100 million a year for the next 5 years, so we can accelerate that repair and maintenance, so that we can keep people here and get those over 2,000 units that are now empty, dilapidated, get them back online, so that that prevents displacement as well. Addressing and unclogging the housing vouchers, people who are living outside in tents who have been approved for vouchers, we have to unclog that logjam to get them into housing as well. There are not a lot of people who choose to live on the street if housing is a viable option for them. So since the council has funded enough housing vouchers to house every single unhoused person in this city, what we have got to do is fix the system so that we are getting people who've been approved with funding that's already in the bank, getting those folks into housing with the wraparound services that they need. That keeps people here as well. Not sexy, but oversight. Addressing displacement, government-driven displacement. A lot of people have heard of the New Communities Initiative. On paper, a tremendous idea. You take public housing that is in desperate need of repair. You tell the people, look, we're going to move you out, but you can move back in. We're going to rebuild the housing. Instead of all low income, it's going to be mixed income. So you'll come back to a shiny new place. Well, we have completely botched that over the years. We have torn down hundreds and hundreds of units of public housing and have put almost none of that housing back online. We've lost track of the people that we've displaced, and we have completely fallen down on the promise that these folks have the right to return to their housing. So one of the public housing residents, the first public housing to be demolished under New Communities about 15 years ago, Temple Courts and the Golden Rule. It was demolished 15 years ago. We just finished the first replacement building. What I'm trying to make sure is all the people that we promised could come back, are they coming back? Right now, the answer is no. So that's why we're doing really diligent and aggressive oversight to make sure we're living up to the promises we make, and that the government is not contributing to displacement. The last thing I'll say on this point, because it's something that's very acute right now, wages have not gone up substantially. Inflation is through the roof. People are already struggling to figure out how they're going to pay rent, even people who make pretty healthy salaries. Well, rents are going up, including in rent stabilized or rent control units. We are going to see the highest increase in rent for rent control units that we've seen in about 40 years. This is something that can lead to displacement. Not everybody in a rent control unit is income limited, because we don't means test rent control for reasons I still don't understand. But there are a lot of people who even live in rent control units who are going to have a hard time paying what could be about a 9% increase in rent. And that's another cause of displacement. I want us to be more careful about the things that are displacing people, so that one, we can prevent displacement, and two, we're not paying more money on the back end to address issues of homelessness. So, an ounce of prevention, I don't know the rest of that saying, but an ounce of prevention is good. It goes a long way. That's where I want us to be focused, particularly as the city's budgets are getting more constrained. We have the first projected revenue shortfall in a lot of years. Means we're going to have to be more cautious and pull back on a lot that we spend. So I think where we have to be focused is preventing future harms. We're going to have to be working to address upstream problems.
Thank you for that answer, council member. And that you perfectly transitioned into my next question with the end of that there, just about, talking about revenue. And even that's, like almost constraining, if it's the work you're able to do as the council and really, providing these solutions in kind of all of the areas, of housing. So what, aside from that, since you've already touched on it, what are some of the biggest, challenges or impediments that you see, like looking, forward to these next 2 years, kind of getting in the way of really, accomplishing change, you know, within housing, within the housing space, within the issue of housing affordability?
So I see three impediments. The first is revenue declines. Again, this is going to be the first time in a very long time in the district where we are going to have to cut programs. We may have made choices here and there to cut programs in the past, but we're going to have to cut some programs now. That's a big impediment. The second is making programs work more effectively. Too often, government is happy just to have a program that exists. We are not hard enough on ourselves to make sure programs work well and operate efficiently. We have to be a lot more focused on the efficiency of programs. So what I've requested actually today, because I had a confirmation hearing with the new now acting Department of Housing and Community Development Director, I want a breakdown of all of our housing programs, what groups of people qualify for them, how much we spend on each of those programs, including programmatic funding, employee funding, all of it, and how many units it's producing, so that we can start to audit our work, see which programs are producing for the amount of money that we spend on it. I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back anymore just because we have a program that exists when we're spending goo gobs of money and not helping a whole lot of people. So efficiency is going to be a big challenge for us, a big impediment. The last is transparency and accountability. Some agencies, and the Housing Authority is one of them, just have not been tremendously transparent about their work and decision making over the years. And they're going to have to turn the corner, because we can't really, do effective oversight or audit how effective these agencies or their programs are if we don't have a clear window into how they operate and how they are measuring their progress. So those are the three things: revenue shortfalls, efficiency of programs, and transparency in the work that agencies are doing.
Appreciate it. And kind of a follow-up to that, maybe something of less negative point of view, but what are some things that you're, particularly excited about, problems to, try and tackle, or work that you have coming down the pike, with the housing committee, that you're just really excited about?
A couple things I'm excited about. One is the prospect of a new downtown. So when I got to the council in 2016, I started working on an idea to transform older office buildings into housing, with a particular focus on workforce housing and low-income housing. Everybody laughed at me in 2016. Now it's the hot idea. Downtowns, I don't care how much sort of people hope, it's not going back to what it was in 2019 or the beginning of 2020. Downtowns in DC and across the nation just won't be that thing again. And the more time we waste lamenting what was or hoping that what was will come back, the more time we waste seizing the opportunity for the next chapter of downtown. I see a downtown where people live there, which means stores are open 24 hours, or at least after 5. If you try to find coffee after 5 o'clock downtown, you won't find it. Everything is closed. We can create new housing in a city that desperately needs housing. We have an opportunity to create whole new neighborhoods, more grocery stores, more dry cleaners, more coffee shops, more integrated workspace. So the next chapter of downtown is something I'm really excited about because the possibilities are so broad and unique, because this challenge has brought us a unique opportunity. The other thing I'm really excited about is exploring new housing ideas. I'm not going to sit as chair of the housing committee for 2 years and twiddle my thumbs because I can't find the perfect answer. I accept that there is no perfect answer on housing, so we got to figure out the best answer and move forward. That means we're exploring ideas like social housing, as I mentioned earlier, reforming how we develop public lands, community land trusts. We have a lot of housing tools. Now we need more housing tools. So we're going to explore those ideas and put some of them, the ones that work, the ones that are viable, we're going to put them online. And I'm really, really excited about that.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and that sounds like, it could be very exciting work, especially coming up in the next 2 years. Just kind of seeing the time and being mindful, of your time, council member. I'm going to use this at least as my last question before turning it over to Howard to pivot to, some of the questions that we've had pre-submitted by our attendees as they were registering, and then some of them that I've seen coming through the chat, at least as messages to myself. And just a reminder to folks, like, if you do have questions, please drop them in the chat and we will, do our best to get to them. And I'm sure if we, aren't able to get to them, we can always ask the council member offline and we can send out those answers if need be. So my final question, council member, is, you talked about kind of in your approach for the council period, having such a focus on community engagement. What does that, more plan look like immediately? But I think too, more of an actionable item for the folks, on this call, or how can we, as engaged citizens and district residents, how can we be engaged with you and your team in the work that you're doing?
It's a wonderful question. Come to our hearings, talk about your priorities, be vocal on housing issues. One of the reasons I've been able to start making real progress on the housing authority, for instance, these are issues that have existed a long time, but the more people focus on a particular issue, the more of an opportunity I and other council members, even the mayor, have to address those. A lot of people think, oh, once you're a council member, you can just do whatever you want. No, I need the public behind me. I need public voices in order to give me a runway to address things. And so if you're quiet on issues, then it makes it harder to address those issues, even for your elected officials. So continue to dive into these issues. If you, in your meetings and exploration, have ideas that you think are good and viable for the city, bring them to us so that we can work through them, see if they're viable, see if we can get them online and funded. I promise you, nobody in this city has any perfect ideas on housing. So we still need a lot more heads at the table. We still need a lot more people jumping into this space, exploring what possibilities exist, what possibilities we may have missed. And if we are doing that together, holding each other accountable, having these conversations about what ideas we can really bring to life, that's the best path for the next chapter of housing in DC.
Fantastic. Thanks for taking the time to answer some of the questions that we brought to the table for you, council member. So with that, I'm gonna stop talking and turn things over to Howard to kind of carry us through from now until the end of our time together this evening.
Good afternoon, council member. Again, thank you so much for taking out the time to meet with us to just talk about these issues that are within our community. I do have a couple follow-up questions from the couple things that you said previous before going into the couple of questions we do have from the audience. The first question is, when speaking about the homeless encampment evictions, and the backlog of, the vouchers. As you mentioned, the evictions are making it harder for us to fix that issue of the backlogs. When, we evict them, we don't have any sort of communication as to where they're going and their location. So is there a process in place to ensure that, the residents within our city who've been on the backlog for years on years, once they're displaced, is there any follow-up efforts or any way to keep in communication to ensure that we find them housing, especially that since they've been waiting for so long?
Great question, Howard. Here's one. You're hitting on one of the other big concerns and problems with the encampment clearings. People who are homeless are connected with case managers or caseworkers, and the caseworkers know where they are living. When we do the encampment clearings, often their caseworkers don't know where the folks have moved to. And when the people that are saying, I'm here to help you, come in with dump trucks and law enforcement, you stop believing that they're there to help you. So you stop communicating with your caseworker. And so the clearings themselves create gaps in communication between caseworkers who can help get people out of homelessness, to help get them housed, get the supports they need. It breaks that trust and that chain of communication. So it becomes a big problem. So we can only keep track of people if we know where they are and can reach them. And often with people who are unhoused, if they get moved, you may not reach them again. It may be a long time before you can reach them again.
Okay, thank you. The final question I have, speaking on transparent accountability, in regards to, residents, I think the residents with lived experiences who are dealing day-to-day basis with the public housing that we offer them, making sure that their work orders are being addressed, making sure that their houses that they're living in are habitable. Like you said, coming to the council meetings can sometimes be a disservice to them because they're either working or at home with family. Is there any other means so they're that they're able to voice their concerns, or able to tell us what they're going through? Because oftentimes going through the normal means of going through straight to the property owner or whatever may get displaced somewhere. Is there another way that they're able to voice their concerns to ensure that there is accountability, but we also know what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, there is another opportunity, but only because we're being proactive. So I'm going to visit public housing properties so that I can hear from people who are not coming to the council. Earlier today, I met with the presidents of the resident advisory councils from all of the public housing complexes around the city. There are about 45 of them. So that's another opportunity. Through these folks were elected by each community, elects their own president. So I'm hearing concerns through the presidents. Sean Cuddy-High attends the DC Housing Authority board meeting, so we're hearing from things that way. We host hearings. Our last hearing with the Housing Authority was 13 hours long, so we're hearing from people that way. So I'm making every effort that I can think of to hear from people who don't necessarily just show up or come, but that means that we have to be proactive. So when I talk about taking the housing committee into the community, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go into some questions from the audience. We have a question from Janice Fairby, who asks, where are the timeframes and accountability standards in the next 12 to 18 or 24 to 60 months and beyond?
Ms. Fairby, I'm not sure exactly which standard. So if I don't answer your question, please clarify. What I'm working to do for every agency under the jurisdiction of the Housing Committee is push them to identify their key goals and metrics. So what are your key goals? How do you measure success? What are the metrics that you use to know whether you're getting closer to those goals or not? And in addition to oversight hearings, I meet individually with the agency directors to make sure they're moving in that direction. With the work of the committee, I continue to try to be clear and very public about what our priorities are and our timelines. So this meeting is not the first time that I've spoken about immediate priorities. Fixing DC Housing Authority, which means creating unprecedented transparency, getting vacant units back online. Those are one priority. Sorting out the Housing Production Trust Fund and addressing the backlogs that's causing homeless encampments. Those are the immediate priorities of the Housing Committee. And over the next, well, not 8 months anymore, but I guess about 5.5 months left, we are finishing what I call our deep dive, our housing and homelessness deep dive, where we are spending time in encampments, in shelters, in public housing, in dilapidated housing, and also meeting with housing experts and housing providers to understand these issues and the nuances in order to inform the agenda of the committee for the next 2 years. So I believe it is important to be very clear and public about our priorities and timelines, and to make sure we are pushing our agencies to create their own priorities and their metrics so that we are all on the same page about what success looks like and how they are or are not making progress on those goals.
Thank you. We do have a question from Peter. If you want to come off mute, Peter, and ask your question to the council member.
Good afternoon, council member. My question is the very expensive cost of conversion of office buildings. And they are very expensive because you're dealing with airflow, you're dealing with windows and all of that. Do you think that is something that relates to affordable housing? Or if we're doing it downtown, is it much more realistic that at the cost of that it will bring tax-paying residents and citizens into the district to increase our tax base and spend the money that we want them to spend downtown, rather than that being affordable housing or an option to get to there?
Great question, Peter. Converting office buildings into residential does cost money. It often costs less money because you can use the infrastructure of the building. You cannot do that with every building, but it is a cost-efficient way to do construction. And we know that because conversions happen all over DC, all over the United States, all over the world. And private companies wouldn't do those conversions if it didn't make financial sense. But to your other point about, yes, it will cost more for us to, so we have to subsidize the affordable housing we want. We're going to have to pay for that. It will cost us more to subsidize affordable housing downtown. It will cost us more to subsidize housing in Ward 3, but it is important that we do that because we don't want to continue to over-concentrate poverty, because we have learned over the years the cost of that. So we do want to expand our tax base, but we also don't want to over-concentrate poverty. And that's a difficult balance. And I recognize and I remind people all the time, hey, when we're talking about affordable housing downtown or in Ward 3 and in many other parts of the city, it means we're creating less of it because we're paying more. But I believe that's a trade-off that we have to make.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have a question from Angela. If you want to get off mute, Angela, and ask your question to the council member.
I think I saw Angela's question come up in the chat, and it was about rent increases. So Angela, if your question is different, let me know. Oh, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, hello, Council Member Robert White. Thank you so much. I was having some technical issues, but yes, my concern is, do you have a plan to prevent the astronomical rent hike? Because forgive me, people, but the rent is just getting too damn high in DC. It's chokehold rent.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Angela, thank you for asking what's a really important question right now. The rent is too high. The pending possible rent increases are daunting. It is on my radar. I'm working for an answer now. I don't have an answer yet. Let me tell you the big thing that I'm considering, that I'm trying to make sure I balance. So many people in rent control units or not cannot afford an increase in rent. What happens if we limit rent increases and building owners sell their building? It will never be more affordable. It will absolutely be less affordable and lead to displacement. So where I'm trying to find the balance is, how do we limit the rent increases without doing something that's going to screw people in 2 years? Because I've watched so many buildings get sold and turned into luxury condos, and this naturally occurring affordable housing ceases to exist forever. So there is a really important trade-off that could hurt people so much if we don't get it right. That's the reason I'm looking everywhere I can to make sure I get this balance right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the audience that we would like to ask to the council member? You can raise your hand.
If not, Howard, or in case anybody, does, also knowing the time and the council member only has a few more minutes that he can give us. We did have a lot of questions that were pre-submitted that kind of, if I may, kind of talked a little bit or asked about, DC's rent control policy. And kind of more generally, if you could take like a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about DC's rent control policy and some of the more, specific questions that we got, and take all or part of it. Why was the most recent increase for rent controlled units so high, and what can be done to prevent such large increases in the future? And, do you have a broader vision for rent control for all renters in DC?
A great question around rent control, which comes from our Rental Housing Act of 1985. And what the Rental Housing Act did was it put under rent control units that existed at that time and limits the increase in rent to the consumer price index plus 2%. Now, what that generally means is modest rent increases. The increase is less for seniors. It caps out at 5%. The rent increase for everybody else caps out at almost 9%, but it's tied to essentially inflation. Inflation has not been this high since 1982. So we are going to see, likely for a lot of people, the highest rent increase for rent control units since 1982. Again, the rent increase could be as high as 9%. Now, rent control is not a great tool, but it is the best tool that we know for keeping some units sort of more affordable for people. There are a couple concerns I have about rent control. One, the cost comes out elsewhere. So other units will cost more money because of rent control units. The other concern I have is that rent control is not income restricted. So I could make $1 million a year and live in a rent control unit. All of our other housing tools are targeted based on need. Rent control is not. And a lot of people feel very strongly that it should not be. I got to tell you, I don't understand the argument. I've had the conversation a lot of times. I don't understand the argument. So what I'm trying to figure out now is, for people in rent control units with limited incomes, is there something the government can do to blunt the rent increase for people with limited incomes who live in rent control units? That requires, I'm trying to find data that exists or may exist in a whole lot of different places, because there's no there's no sort of clear, no agency can say to me, well, Councilmember White, this is where all the people with, you know, limited incomes live in rent control units. So I'm trying to piece together this information. The other thing I really want to do, well, that I'm planning to do in the Housing Committee is figure out if rent control is not the best tool, are there tools that are working better than rent control in other parts of the country? And can we transfer those types of programs here? So we are focused on really examining every possible tool that we can beef up in DC, that we can bring to DC, and how they work together. Social housing may end up being a better idea than rent control. Community land trust may end up being a better idea. Maybe it's a combination of these, but we have to have a committee willing to explore these types of ideas and explore them for viability, not just splash. It's easier to push something through that gives you a good headline, but is not good for people in the long term than it is to figure out what actually works in reality. The example I'll give is the District Opportunity to Purchase Act, which has been on the books in DC for 10, 15 years. It gives the district government the opportunity to purchase residential buildings to keep them affordable. It has been used 0 times. So I'm sure when that bill passed, a whole lot of people celebrated and said, this is a great day for affordable housing in DC. It's never been used. I don't want to pass stuff that's not going to get used, that's not going to help people. I want to pass stuff that's going to help real people. That means we have to do some hard work, and even sometimes say what I'm saying to you, I don't know the answer on this yet. That is an important thing to do, to be square with people, but do the work to find that best answer.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that question, Councilmember. And I'm gonna pass it back to Howard here.
Yes, as we close up, Councilmember, we again want to say thank you for taking out the time to speaking with us tonight. We do know that these conversations are very healthy as we continue to find the solution to ensure that housing is a right for everyone, especially for our most vulnerable community. And we do want to inform everyone that we do have a part 3 that will be hosted next month. More details will be coming out within the next couple of weeks to continue the conversation, to talk about solutions, continuing issues within our community, because it's moments like these on how we move the conversation forward and find solutions. And as someone who does work in housing, I know that these solutions can be complex, especially when you're dealing with people's lives on a day-to-day basis. So with that being said, Councilmember, thank you again for your time. If you have any final comments, this is your moment to say so, or before we disconnect.
Well, let me just say thank you again for having me. Thank you for hosting this conversation, a series of conversations on housing. Please stay tuned to the work that we're doing. You're going to see some proposals come out of my office on housing and homelessness that you're going to be like, go, brother, go. I love that one. You're going to see some that you're like, I don't like that one. You're going to see ideas coming, continue to come from my office. Be in touch with us. And if you want to stay up to date on what we're doing, how we're fixing issues, please sign up for our newsletters. You will not get spammed. You will get good information. You can sign up at robertwhiteatlarge.com. So again, thank you for having me. Maggie and Howard, thank you for moderating as well.
Thank you so much, Councilmember. Everyone have a great night. And as to follow up, if you are interested in continuing, please subscribe to Ward 2 or Ward 6 email blast so you can continue to learn about the upcoming events. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.